Mexico. So in 2008, financial institutions were on the spot for inadequate derivatives management and due diligence. Many consider that banks' greed and reckless behavior was unmerited for bailout. And that's an important reminder of how regulation and supervision are at place for any financial institution, given their key role in economic integration and exchange. But today, I want to talk about a different type of banks, the development banks, that might change the way you think of financial institutions. There's evidence from various countries that development banks play a major role in economic development and industrialization. Japan and South Korea provide many examples of these banks' strong role as financing vehicles, supporting industrial planning policies and export strategies. To be competitive, a country needs to create value and also generate an advantage. It also needs to lay the foundations for economic development. I mean, roads, bridges, communications, and services. That is infrastructure, which is the fundamental platform for development. One notable example of these two components is China. In the last 20 years, China has reached an impressive economic growth of 10%. This graph from McKinsey shows that in 20 years, China has overcome the United States and the European Union as the world's largest investor in infrastructure, allocating about $500 billion, or 8.5% of its GDP. Mexico currently allocates about 5% of its GDP to infrastructure, well above the Latin America average, and including Brazil, which is at 1.8%. China has been successful in mobilizing capital to finance large-scale investment projects, coming primarily from domestic funds, through development banks and state-owned commercial banks. A smaller portion also comes from the private sector and capital markets. Decision-making process in China is actually very interesting, but I'll skip that part and rather turn to a case study, the Three Gorges Dam, a hydropower dam in the Yangtze River with a capacity of generation of 22.5 gigawatts. Just to give you an idea of the amount of energy, think 100 watts is what you get from a conventional bulb in your house. Now I think you are all familiar how much is 1.21 gigawatts. It's the amount of energy generated by a lightning bolt. So to generate that, you're going to need 60% capacity of a hydropower dam here in the United States. For example, the Hoover Dam. So just to compare the amount of power generation, the Hoover Dam produces close to 2.1 gigawatts, while the Three Gorges produces 22.5. The project aims to reduce China's dependence on coal-fired energy generation. But despite its tremendous potential, the Three Gorges Dam will not be able to operate at full capacity, which requires 175 meters depth in the dam. In order to guarantee flood control, the water levels should be reduced to 145 meters. Otherwise, the increased water levels are going to cause problems in water pollution, silt accumulation that are going to affect water supply and navigation. This project also costs forced resettlement of more than 6 million people. And there are scientific studies that show that shifting the weight of the reservoir had an impact in causing the earthquake in 2008 in the Sichuan province. So this example prompts a shift in the way we approach these problems. And it tells us that they demand a broader perspective, not only in terms of the financial structuring of these projects, but also at the industry level. I mean, the technical elements involved in the operation of risks, the economic and social impact of these projects, also the environmental management required, for large-scale infrastructure projects in an increasing global environment. Recently, the Chinese government has changed or was forced to change their approach to these problems, and they have leaned towards innovation and high technology to address all these huge, large demand in their urbanization challenges. Mexico has also made important transition in many relevant areas, including financial inclusion, water management, renewables in wind energy, and hydroelectric and gas-fired generation. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you the research I've been doing for the last years during my master's degree here. And I think this conversation will prompt more ideas of how we can enhance Mexico's infrastructure and competitiveness in the world. Thank you. The floor is open for questions.
Congratulations. A couple of questions. One, in Mexico, one of the biggest challenges for the development banks was their inefficiency and the levels of corruption. That's when the private sector stepped in, and I guess we're all familiar with it. But those were huge challenges. They were not able to deliver, and when they delivered, you just showed the metro, and we're all familiar with, in sometimes very inefficient ways. That's one. I would like to hear your perspective. How could that be tackled? The second one is the private banking sector for many years has stolen the talent. When I look at you and you're a unique group of Mexicans starting here, the private financial services sector pays such level of incentives, like you say, such bonuses, that the best and the brightest would go working for them. How can the government tackle that one? I would like to hear your point of view on the two questions.
Sure. On your first question, I think development banks in Mexico have been through a long transition because they first were very heavy state and state enterprises. They had too much personnel and they had high costs and they were not efficient in allocating their resources. They have been shrinking their competencies and trying to focus on very specific areas. So that's why in Mexico we have a housing, Sociedad Hipotecaria Federal, we have NAFINSA for companies, we have Banoras for infrastructure and public services, we have Bansefi, so they are all more focused, and I think that's going to help them direct their efforts in a more efficient manner. The other thing is that I think private sector should be able to provide. That's the idea that the free market allows the efficient allocation of resources. So the goal or the objective of development banks is specifically trying to address the needs of the sectors that are not bancarized, that do not have access. For example, the municipalities that do not have a credit score or do not have ratings. So the point of development banks is to go to address, for example, these high risk projects in infrastructure are very difficult for private banks and commercial banks to go into because they have very high risks. So I think Mexico has taken important steps in making development banking more efficient and also respecting the fact that the private sector is also needed. So it should be an effort from both sides to achieve more effective results.
What about the talent?
Well, the talent is also an incentive. So I think for some people who are interested in public policies, they will be more interested in working in a development bank because they will have the chance to change the policies and look at the industry in a broader perspective, which is what I'm presenting. And that's something that the private sector doesn't give you. So if you have the ambition to shape the industry and really make a contribution, and if you think of the public service as also doing something for your country, I think you will find more incentives to go to the public sector. Yes?
Hi, I'm Elena. When I saw your presentation, I was very interested because I'm interested in the topic, and I think that Mexico needs to rethink how we build infrastructure and how we build our energy because we're not doing it in a very efficient way. And at the beginning, I was very struck when you showed them, thinking that that was a good example because I think that we need to appropriate another kind of developing these kind of systems. But as you're looking into the financial assets, I don't know if you could explain more about how, because these investments come from an international fund or the World Bank or the International Development Bank or something like that, and they arrive to very small cities or rural areas, and actually the persons who are involved in that process is not the municipal government, but it's a larger state government. So I don't know how you see the relationship with the local.
Yes, actually, well, this big project was not sponsored by any international institution like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank. It was mostly financed by domestic resources, as I mentioned. And it was not financed by the World Bank because the World Bank had second thoughts after many experiences. You know, this is a story of failure and success, and your capacity to adapt to changes and to challenges. So the World Bank found that these big dams were not contributing to energy generation as much as they were contributing to pollution and environmental problems. So they started financing these projects because of their profile, because they were risky. So China had to go to this project with their own resources. And they engineered the way to get access to these funds through local mechanisms, and that's very innovative from China, so I think that's also something we can learn from what they have done. So it's also, I mean, the conclusion, something I missed because the time was kind of pressing, but the conclusion was that the ability of countries like China to mobilize resources and do projects like this, and what they are facing is challenges because they are not always just successful or just a failure. It's something that implies more things, and you should put more, just, you know, more resources and more perspectives into it to get innovative solutions. Thank you very much.